So anyway, it's a big welcome today. So we're going to talk a bit about the history of pulmonary hypertension, how far we've come in the last 20 odd years. Now I'm looking around here and I didn't recognise Chris when he came to clinic, so I was given a bit of a telling off first thing this morning from Chris, very understandably. But there are many people here who I've looked after with the team and who've inspired us going back now a period of over 20 years. So I think that's reassuring for people who come here as well, that you often go on the internet, you look at pulmonary hypertension and it can look, very, very frightening. But I think the reality is that many people live very, very active and very full lives. And when we were thinking about the meeting today, what we were reflecting on is the reason why we're here. And the reason why we're here today is to try and make this journey for people affected by pulmonary hypertension as good as it can be. And it can be fantastic. And over the years, I've heard lots and lots of very, very inspiring stories. So great that you're all here today. And I just thought I'd start with a question here. We don't use wool clap for this. I'm pretty old school. Is it on wool clap now? Yeah. Right. So it's just to get you tested, test you here a little bit, that which is the odd one out. So we've got these places around the world. So we've got Barcelona, we've got Madrid, San Francisco, Athens, and the Colosseum. So I'm not quite sure if you can pick out which is the odd one out here. So I don't know if you can just get voting. It's tricky. This is a very, very tricky question. We hear in the NHS all the stress that the medical staff and everything are under at the moment. So I'm quite interested just to see if you're able to pick out the odd one. Is it displaying on your telephone? So many of you gone for the football match in Madrid. I think that's an understandable answer to that question. It does look very different to the other places. And I think second is San Francisco, the bridge. Maybe that's the only one with water. But the real answer is that number 5 is the answer. So I went on holiday there. The other 4 were work trips with my carer, Neil Hamilton. So one of the nice things in medicine for us as doctors, physicians, nurses is we do get to travel the world. And in pulmonary hypertension, the UK plays very much a leading part in pulmonary hypertension in terms of research and treatment. So we're very fortunate we get invited to go and speak in all these very nice places. So I think history is very important. There's not many people in this room who'll be able to go back to AD 199, but I know Ian celebrated a big birthday quite recently, but it's not a great picture here. This, I don't think it's quite stone-faced. It's one of the early selfies, and this is Claudius Galen. So Thanos here, he's representing the Greek team, of course, and the Greeks are very famous. But in the olden days, people used to think that blood came around the body, went to the right heart, and then there were little invisible pores, and the blood went from one side of the heart to the other. But actually, it wasn't until the 1300s that this other, again, not a great selfie, Ibn al-Nafis, is the gentleman who was attributed to have discovered the pulmonary circulation. So whilst we were running around in mud huts, I think in the United Kingdom, in the Middle East, people were making quite important medical findings. So he described that blood went from the right heart through the lungs to get oxygen and then back to the left heart and got pumped around the body. So quite an important discovery back in the 1300s. And again, not a great selfie again, measuring the pressure in the lungs, but when we're managing conditions, what's really important if we want to come up with new treatments is we need to be able to measure things. And actually, it was in 1929 that Werner Forssmann, who was a urologist, inserted a cardiac catheter in himself. So he inserted a catheter, it was a urological catheter, and he inserted it through a vein, and he was able to sample blood from the heart. And of course, people thought he was a crazy man. But of course, crazy man can make lots of treatment advances. And it was in 1945 that Cournand and Richards actually established right heart catheter, which many people in this room will have undergone, as a diagnostic test for pulmonary hypertension. And when you can measure something, you can introduce new treatments. And this is how important it was. These guys were awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine. So people recognize the importance of the pulmonary circulation. So I thought we'd just have some light relief. I thought... This is how you get a selfie taken, I think, isn't it? So, it's got nothing to do with pulmonary hypertension. Anyway, so Donald Heath. So many of you might have seen when you come to Sheffield, we call ourselves Donald Health, Donald Heath Research Sheffield. And Donald Heath was a medical student in Sheffield and a junior doctor. And it was while he was in his mid-20s that he did a lot of research in pulmonary hypertension and came up with the idea that changes in the blood vessels in the lungs were associated with different types of clinical features. So he did a lot of work in pulmonary hypertension, and he was able then to try and separate different forms of pulmonary hypertension. And for many of you in this room, you will know that you've got different types and forms of pulmonary hypertension. And this is as long ago as the 1950s. And Donald Heath also discovered that different plant extracts and different environmental exposures can also cause pulmonary hypertension. So he made lots and lots of different advances. And so back in the 1950s, Sheffield was a major cardiothoracic centre and actually did the world's first mitral valve replacement. And this, I thought, was a nice picture of Donald Heath. I think he didn't go outdoors, but he was going to altitude and doing lots of stuff at altitude, obviously like a real Englishman wearing his suit, but he was clearly quite a character. So this is the recent past and present. So what was really important 20 years ago, Ian, is we were keen to develop in the UK a network of pulmonary hypertension centres. And I'm sure that many of you here probably had quite a long diagnostic journey. And so the idea was to create a network of centres that could improve the care for people affected by this condition. And Tim Higginbottom, who started down in Papworth, came up here for a chair of respiratory medicine. And he was the first person in the world to use intravenous ibuprostanol as a treatment for pulmonary hypertension. So he pioneered that along with nitric oxide and other drugs like sildenafil. So the UK has been really pioneering in the development of pulmonary hypertension. So we've got lots of inspirational colleagues, lots of inspirational patients. And many of you will know Sammy, one of the nurses on the ward, and he came here speaking no English as he was fleeing from Eritrea. So he learned English, did his GCSEs, and is a very, very valued member of our nursing staff. And of course, you can see Charlie Elliott up there looking very happy, and Mark and Sammy, and also Ian, who's really done very inspirational work, I think, with the Patients Association, which was founded over 20 years ago here in Sheffield. And I know also as well with Sue and other members of the pulmonary hypertension community have played a really key role in establishing the PHA UK. So it's always tricky establishing a national service. I don't know if many people here watch Game of Thrones, but of course in Game of Thrones you have to involve everybody. So we had to involve the Southerners, you know, the Lannisters from down south, my friends in Scotland. And of course, in Sheffield, we feel like we're Winfell. I think we've got our own Sean Bean here in Sheffield. So there is a network of centres, and some of you may move around the country, and it's just to make you aware there are lots of different places that you can get really quite high quality care for patients with pulmonary hypertension. So I'd like now just to go on a little bit to talk about treatment with one of my colleagues, and I do want to say that many moons ago, this was Ian, looking a little bit younger. I think it's a nice picture of Ian, actually. I think it shows him off to his best benefit. But if you look at the newspaper here, it's the Mirror. Of course, we're in the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire. We don't read things like the Times and Telegraph here in Sheffield. But it was shameful. This was a headline in the newspaper just about the cost of drug therapies for pulmonary hypertension and also postcode prescribing. So the PHA at the time and the physicians and nurses played a really, really important and key role in highlighting the need for people to access different therapies. So I now want to go on to talk about treating pulmonary hypertension and finding the right formula. And when we talk about treatment, many of you will know Neil Hamilton, and I think there's more than a passing resemblance to Mr. White from Breaking Bad. So I'd like Neil really to tell us a little bit about the science behind the drugs we use and how we treat pulmonary hypertension. So Neil, over to you, Neil.
Well, thank you very much, David. Can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah, thanks very much, David. So it's my pleasure to be here today and be invited to talk a bit about what I've been doing in terms of treating pulmonary hypertension for about the past 20 years now. And so when David asked me to present to you, I thought, well, I don't know where to start because it's all so complicated, and this seems like a very busy slide. And across the top here, we've got lots of different of the new treatments, and you can see down the left-hand side the change that these vessels have in the context of the disease of pulmonary hypertension.
Neil, hold on. It's Saturday today, Neil.
Saturday? Yeah. You asked me to talk about treatment of pulmonary hypertension.
But what do you and me do on a Saturday, Neil? I mean, we've shown the audience here. We were in Madrid when we were at the meeting. We went to watch some football and things like that. But what are you doing here?
Oh, wrong talk.
Wrong talk, Neil.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rewind.
Yeah. So Neil, I mean...
So what we did was we thought about this, how we can talk about football, talk about pH on a Saturday. That's better, isn't it?
I think it's much better, Neil.
Okay.
And Neil, when we got the junior doctors and some of the more senior doctors who start with us, they can be a little bit slow, I think, sometimes, can't they? And I mean, and I know you guys would probably much rather have listened to the science behind pulmonary hypertension, but when we have our junior doctors coming through, this is how we talk to them about the drugs.
Talk to them about the drugs.
Yeah, if you don't mind us just doing what we do with the junior doctors with you guys. Yeah.
Let's talk about treatment of pulmonary hypertension in the context of who plays where on a football field.
Yeah.
So let's start with the people in goal. So transplant or endarterectomy. So this is our backstop, the surgical options, transplant. So if medical therapies are ineffective or haven't done quite enough, not well tolerated, then transplant is the safety net and the backstop. I've put endarterectomy there because in the context of chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension, it's very worthy of our number one shirt because that may be the very, very best option for our patients.
Yeah. And I think for everyone out there as well, isn't it? That's what we want to do. We want to give you the best treatment, but we always, I think, need to, in that number one jersey, Neil, have to think about, other options. So always we will be thinking about, are these options for you? Because we know that surgery can be curative. But Neil, if we move into the sort of, the central defenders, the big guys or the big women in the centre of defence, you wanted to tell us a little bit about our central defenders.
Yeah, so the central defenders, some old hands with plenty of experience in the back line, diuretics, so that's water pills. So they take the pressure off, they relieve the strain by helping the body clear more fluid. So they play an important role. Not everybody.
You don't play everyone. I mean, not everyone. You don't play every game.
Diuretics, but I would say the majority of it does come into play at some point. I've also got anticoagulation. Again, it used to be that most people would be prescribed anticoagulants of some form or other. These are blood thinners. But as the understanding of the condition has evolved, then it's rather like football formations these days in the Premier League, a bit more creative. So we select when we're going to use anticoagulation and when we might not. But again, coming back to chronic thromboembolic pH, obviously people who've had clots, risk of further clots, and anticoagulation absolutely central and always needed.
And it can be stressful as well for people and patients maybe who have idiopathic pulmonary hypertension who we may have treated with anticoagulation in the past, and then you come to clinic and we then have a discussion about stopping anticoagulation. It's like being dropped from a football team. It can feel quite stressful. So that's one of the reasons is with evolving evidence that we sometimes find a new role for different therapies.
So at fullback on the flanks, I've got oxygen and exercise training. Again, might not always be important, and we have to carefully select when we're going to prescribe oxygen for our patients, when it's going to be important, when it isn't. This is very much domestic football, David.
Yeah, I mean,
so oxygen may not be needed.
You mean like Sheffield United?
Like Sheffield United.
Yeah.
But going back to your Real Madrid, if we were like Liverpool, for example, played a lot of European football, then almost certainly we'd need oxygen.
Yeah. So when you do your fitness to fly, often if you've got a degree of limitation, but you don't usually use oxygen, we will sometimes recommend oxygen, but not in everybody.
Exercise training. We're going to hear later on from Kira, who's an expert flown over from Ireland to tell us about the virtues and benefits of exercise training, and definitely in the right setting, then this is always going to be beneficial to our patients.
Yeah. I mean, I think where the excitement is, though, is in the midfield. And I think, Neil, that's where we've really seen big changes, isn't it, in the midfield?
Yeah, so in midfield, firstly, I think we need to mention the PDE5 inhibitors. So this is sildenafil and tadalafil, prescribed for somewhere like 85-90% of our patients. So very widely well tolerated and very effective treatment. And I mean, we've been around long enough that we knew that these used to be very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, it was a big, expensive signing. So, sildenafil, very, very expensive. But
of course, once it went off patent, it became the closest thing we had to a free transfer.
yeah, and that's one of the nice things in pulmonary hypertension is the drugs that were very expensive have now become much cheaper, which allows us to use more drugs and in combination.
So.
Yeah, we're full of PD5 inhibitors. Yeah. Sorry, that's a Sheffield Wednesday fan over there. Yeah, there's not many of them.
The other treatment in the midfield area I've put is endothelin receptor antagonists. So this is bosentan, macitentan, ambrisentan. Combination with the PDE5 inhibitors is beyond any doubt highly effective at stabilizing the condition, improving symptoms.
Yeah.
And in the areas of people have concerns about performance-enhancing drugs, then I think people who are prescribed endothelin receptor antagonists here today will certainly realize that they're subject to very rigorous drug testing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important, the rigorous drug testing. But of course, just like in elite cycling, we do have people who try and evade the testing, Neil. And I don't know if you want to tell us how you deal with those types of people.
They're contacted by the authorities and reminded.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Neil, I do I mean, when you're building a midfield, you want your attacking thrust, don't you? You want to be moving the ball forward. You want to be nice and aggressive, but you do sometimes need this defensive midfield player. I think that's probably the best way to think of Selexipag, Neil, I think.
I think it is. It's the ultimate holding midfield. So keeps things steady, maintains some stability, and it may prevent us from using the more complex options in certain situations.
Yeah.
So I think very worthwhile, and the triple combination across that midfield has really proven benefit now for a number of years. I must say it's not the cheapest option. So one of the things was that when we were trying to bring it into the team, there was battles with NHS England over the transfer fee. But certainly I give a mention to the PHA terraces who really were the 12th man in helping that decision.
I mean, they've got a history of being noisy and disruptive as well, I think, in discussions with the authorities.
So on the right side of the attack, I put riociguat. So this is a more specialist sort of treatment that in a certain scenario can work highly effectively. Mm-hmm. I'd say that what I would say is that I've put it on the right because it will come on more likely as a substitute when the PD5 has been taken away. They don't play well together.
Yeah, I mean, it is like the Vardy and Rooney debacle, isn't it? That,
Wagatha
Christie, yeah. You can't play the two together in the same team, but so if you're going to play riociguat, I'm afraid the PD5 inhibitor, the sildenafil, tadalafil, they've got to go off the field. Yeah.
On the left wing, if you like, I've put nebulized iloprost, and it is somewhat of a left field choice, but can be highly effective with PD5s working in the midfield, sometimes even in combination with the endothelin receptor antagonist as part of a triple threat when maybe the intravenous option isn't an option or not well tolerated. So it is a left field option. But this is a treatment that requires a regular run of games, requires frequency. So putting it in on an ad hoc, one-off basis is going to be much less effective.
Yeah.
And so you've probably all worked out who the striker is, and that's the IV epoprostenol. So potent, fast, effective. That's just the ultimate winner up front.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you can see we got a nice 11, but what we've also got as well now in pulmonary hypertension is we've got like any good professional team is, we've got a really good bench. It's like Man City here now, I think, Neil, isn't it, in the world of pulmonary hypertension? And our bench is growing year on year. So, the calcium channel blocker is a drug, Neil, that, is a player that was been around for a long time.
Yeah, lots of experience. Been around since the 80s, but it can play an important role in certain situations when other treatments may be less effective. And indeed, for people who have their right heart catheter and the additional test of looking for what we call vasoreactivity, so inhaling the nitric oxide, if the pressures fall, then it may be that the calcium channel blocker is the only option you need.
Yeah, the only player on the field.
The only player on the field. Imatinib's the next player on the subs bench. So I've put him on the subs bench because it can be a very effective treatment in the context of severe disease, but there are side effects. So it doesn't make the first 11 on its account that it might injure the opposition on the way to goal.
Yeah, and they're quite serious injuries potentially, but that was in a study when we used much higher doses. And I think one of the reasons for that as well on the pitch is when that drug, that player was combined with anticoagulation, Neil, I think that was where the problems arose.
Yeah, so if anticoagulation is still on at centre-back, there's no place for imatinib coming off the bench.
Yeah, and some people in this room will have taken part in a study looking at imatinib, and we were able to show with lower doses of imatinib using Frankie's very nice pulmonary artery pressure monitors that we were able to have a beneficial effect at a much lower dose that was much less toxic, so much less likely to injure the opposition.
Next one up, we've got sotatercept. So this is a new treatment, absolutely excelling in the academies, in the trial phases worldwide, just getting ready for a place in the first 11. It's a subcutaneous injection, so in football in terms rather like David Beckham's, a unique method of delivery.
We all like David Beckham, of course, don't we? But we're going to hear this afternoon as well about some of the exciting trialists that are about, and we'll be looking to try and get on the pitch, Neil. And I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about our approach in Sheffield to fielding trialists on the bench.
Yeah, so Sheffield, rather like all the UK PH centres, David, very active in terms of clinical trials. We haven't found a cure for this condition as yet, so the search for the next big thing is very much still on.
Yeah. We could go on all day, Neil, couldn't we? But
we've only got one more position on the bench. And
at the moment.
So the last one in the squad I've put is balloon pulmonary angioplasty. So it's a reserve option, but it can be really very effective. I would say one of its benefits is flexibility. So we can use it as a standalone in making a big difference, or it can work in combination with some of the first 11. So really flexible player to have on the bench.
Yeah. So hopefully, having seen the team, you can see that there are lots of different players now, lots of different options. But of course, the success, Neil, is often down to
the manager. And so the manager very much is the team of specialists that you've got in Sheffield and at other PH centres who are using the best evidence, their knowledge of the formations in order to piece together the team of footballing treatments that's needed for you at any one time, and that can change over time. So the manager has a key role in coordinating with the players the best formations.
Yeah.
But as I think we're all aware, and I'm very aware, that it is very much a multidisciplinary approach to pulmonary hypertension across the country and in Sheffield, and working together as a unit in terms of the medical staff, nursing staff, pharmacy, physiotherapy, and all the other professions that are working in the centres to bring everything together. And so it's an absolute pleasure for us to work together to help the patients.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Neil, and I hope you enjoyed our little trot through the different drug therapies and football focus. So, yeah. So thank you very much, Neil. So just very briefly now, the present. So one of the questions is, how do we plan our services and ensure that we're providing good quality care? And I think that's really important for people who are on the receiving end. And So what we have to do is we have to, as Neil says, in terms of football terms, is we need to conduct a detailed analysis. And we do that, of course, through the National Pulmonary Hypertension Audit. So we have to put forward, each centre in the UK has to put forward their metrics to have their performance assessed. And you can see here that in the UK, and this is from the audit from 2020 through to 2021, we can look at the number of patients, and this was just around the time of COVID, so we didn't show individual data during COVID, but we had all the data collated, and you can see here in Sheffield that we've got a large number of patients here, now well over 2,000 people coming to Sheffield. So for people who've been coming here for 20 years, it has become a little bit busier on the wards, and we have moved from upstairs down to M floor. And we have a number of different standards. So these are just how the UK performs, sort of nationally. You can see a little bit of a dip down here in terms of the standards and performance. But what we can see over the last 10 or so years, since the 15 years the audit's been in place, that the standards have consistently improved. And I can tell you, as the chair of the National Audit this year, that this year we evaluated more referrals and started more patients on treatment than ever before. So I think there's a really important improvement in awareness of pulmonary hypertension. And we're going to hear this afternoon about the present and research, and we are very collaborative in the UK as a UK PLC, and we also do a lot of research across with our friends in the States and in Europe and other parts of the world. So there's a lot of research going on, and you're clearly a very, very important part of that and a very, very important stakeholder. And as we look to the future, I just want to say that anything in the world is possible. One of the most frightening things about this slide here with Donald Trump is his mother comes from the Outer Hebrides. My mother comes from the Outer Hebrides, so I think we're probably related. There's very few people live out there. But anyway, I don't have his hair, thank God, so maybe I'm not related. But anyway, the important thing is that anything is possible in pulmonary hypertension. And I also just want to finish, for people who maybe don't come from Sheffield, it's important to recognise that there's always choice. And of course, you can have Worcester sauce, but everyone in Sheffield has Henderson's relish, which we know is far superior. There's some people here from Worcester. Anyway, what's important, I think, for all of you is when you're in your consultations with nursing staff or medical staff or other staff, is to realise that there are choices, and people may well put different types of recommendations to you, but it's always important to decide what you want out of your therapy and your different treatments. And I do like this quote from a long time ago from William Osler. This is a slide that Ian gave me, that the good physician treats the disease, but the great physician treats the patient who has the disease. And I think that's something that all of us here need to do on the other side of the table, is to recognise that all of us in this room, we're all the same, and we're all patients at one time or other. And we need to make sure that we treat people based on what they want out of the different therapies that we have available. And so I always like to finish with a little word from Ian Armstrong, our chair, and I'm not sure, it's a nice video that plays with some fairly shocking music, but I think we've been censored by Sean Clayton today.